It's a real pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. We're really excited to have this opportunity to share our new Follow the Money tools and resources with all of you. IDI has been doing Follow the Money investigations to support grassroots advocates for years now. And we've seen how the information that we find can be a real game changer for communities and their struggles for justice and accountability. We've learned so much since we first launched our Follow the Money initiative in Southeast Asia in 2016. Since that time, we've conducted investment and supply chain investigations into more than 200 harmful projects at the request of grassroots advocates. And the information that we gleaned from those investigations has helped affected communities in over 30 countries to design and implement more effective international advocacy strategies to defend their rights. But there's so much more demand for this research from communities and local advocates than we're able to meet, than our field is able to meet. So we wanted to basically open our books and share our methodology and all the lessons that our team has learned over the past 6 years of doing this work, how to do this research and advocacy more effectively. So this knowledge and skill set can be transferred to more advocates working to support communities in the global South. We've also developed some powerful new financial data tracking tools to help automate some of the most tedious research tasks and make critical financial information much more accessible. We want to build the capacity of our corporate accountability movement to use these tools to empower more communities to fight back against corporate abuse. And that's really the main objective of followingthemoney.org. So Dustin and Natalie are going to walk you through what's on the website. But before they do, I wanted to just say a few words about the theory of change behind this approach to corporate accountability advocacy. Why do we follow the money? Because what we've learned over many years of supporting communities to defend their rights and resources in the face of land grabs and other abuses is that very often behind the primary perpetrator of those abuses, the ones who are visible to communities, most often some powerful national elite or state-backed company, there lies an invisible web of global actors, including transnational corporations, banks, buyers, investors, even development finance and multilateral institutions. Many of these actors are bound by rules that require them to respect human rights and the environment. Others have visible brands and are highly concerned about their corporate image. But because affected people often don't know who is backing these harmful projects, they're unable to devise successful strategies to defend their rights. By following the money, we can help peel back that veil that's covering the projects that are harming these communities to help them see all of those hidden actors and the advocacy opportunities that they open up. It's a really simple concept. The more that we know about who is financing a harmful project upstream, who's buying the goods that are produced downstream, who else is making the project possible and profitable, the more avenues that we can open up for communities to secure accountability. Most of the actors along the investment chain are going to have some degree of influence over and responsibility for the project that is causing harm. So the key is to identify the strongest pressure points along that chain in order to decide where communities and grassroots advocates should focus their limited time, energy, and resources to maximize the chances of success. So what's a strong pressure point? Well, we define a strong pressure point as an actor that has two main characteristics. It's going to be responsive to our advocacy, and it's going to have leverage, the ability to influence decision-making on the ground. So if affected communities can identify the strongest pressure points and take actions to effectively influence them, they can gain unlikely allies to their cause, and that can help level the playing field. So we think an effective advocacy strategy really aims to move from those pressure points upstream or downstream toward the midstream, where the business operating the project, government agencies, and affected communities are directly interacting, because ultimately that's where remedy and conflict resolution has to happen. So that's the theory. But we thought that the most interesting way that we can show you what's in these resources and how the theory works in practice is to walk you through the website using an actual case that we investigated, and then use the findings to help communities design and implement a multi-pronged strategy to defend their rights. The case study that Dustin and Natalie are going to speak to is the CBG bauxite mine in Guinea. And I'll just set the scene for you before handing it over to Dustin. CBG is the oldest bauxite mining operation in Guinea, which has the world's largest bauxite reserves. And it secured concessions to mine this ore, which is used to make aluminum, from an area of land roughly 4 times the size of New York City, in Guinea's most important agricultural region. And since the mid-1970s, CBG has been exploiting the land of local farmers and customary landowners without their consent, without paying them compensation, and without rehabilitating and returning the land after they're done mining it. This land grabbing has caused a major disruption to the traditional crop rotation system and herding practices of local communities. It's eroded the entire productive base of their economy. The mine has seriously impacted rivers and other natural water sources that are relied upon by dozens of villages. And it's also had severe impacts on biodiversity, including critical habitats for endangered chimpanzees. All of this destruction, along with a total failure to provide any real development benefits to the host communities, has caused enormous anger and frustration amongst the local population, leading to riots that left several people dead in 2017. But the CBG mine is very important for the government of Guinea. It brings in a huge amount of money, a whopping 20% of its revenues. And the global demand for bauxite is surging as countries and companies race to source raw materials for electric cars and renewable energy technology. Now, the request to investigate this project came to us from the mayor of the town that is the center of the mine's operations, who we met at a strategy meeting about mining and human rights in Guinea. So with that context, I'm going to hand it over to Dustin now to walk us through the website and how we followed the money behind the CBG mine. Dustin, over to you.
Thanks, David. Hi, everyone. I'm Dustin Rosa. I'm the research director at IDI. Thanks so much for joining us at this webinar. So I just wanted to give you a little tour of our new Follow the Money website and a little demo of the 2 new data tools that we've launched alongside it. As David mentioned, we have investigated more than 200 harmful projects since we launched Follow the Money in 2016. And this website is kind of the culmination of all the lessons that we've learned in 6.5 years of doing that research. We've tried to make the website as accessible and practical as possible. And really the idea is you can just kind of dive right in on the first day and just start using it right away. So let's take a look at the website together. The first thing that I wanted to point out is that it can be translated into 9 different languages. So if you just go to this little gray bar at the top right and click here, you can choose a language. Just to note that right now, these are Google translations. So there are going to be some imperfections in the translations, but we will get a human interpreter to improve the translation in the coming months. The main thing to sort of point out about the website is it's really divided into kind of 2 key areas. So the first area, which you see here, is how to follow the money. And that is really kind of focused on research. And that's what I'm going to talk about, right? So how do you research an investment in a supply chain? And then how do you identify the pressure points for advocacy in that investment in supply chain? And then the other kind of key area of the site is how to hold corporations accountable. And that really looks at, taking that research that you've done and using it to design effective advocacy strategies. And my colleague Natalie is going to talk about that in a few minutes. So, David told you about the CBG case, that bauxite mine in Guinea. So what I want to do is just kind of walk you through the research portion of the website using CBG as an example. And then I want to demo those two data tools, also using CBG as an example. So, if you're new to the site, if you're coming here for the first time, a good place to just kind of start and get situated is the How to Follow the Money landing page. So I'm just going to click on that and we'll go there now. And if you scroll down here to the bottom, you're going to see these green boxes. Now, these are really kind of a step-by-step guide on how to follow the money. So these are the steps, roughly in order that IDI's research team would take if we were investigating a new project. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on this first box up here. What are investment and supply chains? So, almost every project that we have researched at IDI has both an investment and a supply chain. So what are investment and supply chains? I think it's helpful to imagine the image of a river as a sort of metaphor for a project. And if you look at that river, really the project itself is going to be here in what we call the midstream of the river. And that's going to be what's most visible to impacted communities on the ground. In addition to the project itself, in the midstream, you're probably going to find the locally registered company that's actually operating or developing the project. You might find contractors that are working on the project, equipment suppliers, and perhaps even host government representatives. So that's kind of the midstream. And again, that's what's most visible to communities on the ground. If you move up the river here, you get to what we call the upstream or the investment chain. And that is where stakeholders like shareholders, investors, banks, lenders, insurers, development finance institutions, that's where they are. And these stakeholders are funneling money down the river towards the project, and then profit from their investment is rolling back up to them. So that's the upstream. And then downstream, so this part here below the project is what we call the supply chain. So if your project is producing a commodity like palm oil, let's say, or a mineral like gold, or if it's an electricity plant that's generating power, it's going to have a supply chain. And the supply chain is where you find the buyers, the traders, the refiners, the processors, and really, at the end, ultimately, end users, potentially consumer brands that are using that commodity in their products. So in general, the commodity tends to move downstream, and then money tends to move back up to the project itself. So that's just kind of a brief overview of investment and supply chains. So, at IDI, when we start researching a case, the place that we generally start is what we call the corporate structure. And the goal of that phase of the research is really to try to figure out, who are the company or companies that actually own and control that project. And once we figure that part out, everything else in the investment and supply chain kind of flows from there. So I wanted to show you that page, the researching corporate structure page. So if you just go up to the How to Follow the Money drop down, you can find all the research pages that way. And I want to click on this first one here, how to research corporate structures. So, all of our research pages on the site are organized in a very similar way. And this page is going to give you a sense of how that is laid out. So there are kind of three key sections for every page. The first section is really just kind of laying out key concepts and terminology, right? And so in this case, we are defining what corporate structures are, and we're giving you an example of one here. We're also defining what a parent company is and talking about why those are important. You'll notice that all of these terms that have underlines under them, if you just hover your mouse over those terms, you'll get a little pop-up box with a short definition of that term, and that's throughout all of our the entire website. So that's kind of the first part of every page, is just defining those key terms. The second part is really getting into how to identify pressure points as you go through this research, right? So when you're doing this research, you're very likely going to uncover hundreds or perhaps even thousands of actors that are involved in a project. And it's really important as you're going through that information to really drill down and try to understand what are the actors that are going to be most important in designing an advocacy strategy, the pressure point. So in the case of corporate structures, understanding where parent companies are based and registered is really important in assessing them as pressure points. Because, for instance, if a parent company is based in an OECD country, which you see here, that's an important pressure point potentially because affected communities could file a complaint to a national contact point, which Natalie will talk about in a little bit more detail. So that's the second key section. And then the final section on every page is really just the how-to. So how do you actually do this research? And what sources do you need to do it? So for corporate structures, these are the kinds of sources that you're going to be looking at. They're divided into categories and they all have hyperlinks that you can follow to get to the actual source itself. So, things like company filings with stock exchanges or corporate registries. So with the CBG mine in Guinea, we used a combination of these sources really to figure out that the mine was actually owned by three very large corporate parents. So we found that a US company called Alcoa was a part owner of the mine. Rio Tinto was another part owner. That's a UK mining corporation that you might be familiar with. And then the third kind of corporate parent was a German firm called Dadco. And we also figured out that the Guinean government had a 49% stake in the project, although it was a pretty passive stake. So this was all really important information for us, and it was a real starting point. And once we figured out who these kind of corporate parents were that were controlling the mine, we could start looking at other parts of the investment and supply chain. So let's go back to the how to follow the money dropdown, which is up here, and kind of go through the process. So we figured out the corporate structure. The next thing that we looked at was midstream actors, right? So that's that middle part of the river metaphor. And so we looked at, could we find any contractors or equipment suppliers or other actors that were directly working on the project that were important. And then we assessed them as pressure points. And then we sort of, once we figured that out, we moved kind of further up in the investment chain. So the next thing that we wanted to do was we wanted to look at shareholders. So we had those three parent companies. We wanted to figure out, were there any shareholders of those parent companies that were potential pressure points? So this page will kind of show you how to do that. We also wanted to look at lenders. So, which banks were potentially lending directly to the mine itself, or also lending to those corporate parents. And so that page will tell you how to do that. And then we also, this is really critical, we wanted to look at whether any development finance institutions were involved in the mine, because they're such important pressure points for advocacy. So again, this page will show you how to do that. And the CBG case, definitely had a supply chain. It's a bauxite mine. And so, this page, how to research supply chains, kind of lays out sort of key concepts in researching supply chains. Now, it's important to point out that in our experience at least, every supply chain is very different. It really depends on the commodity and the project itself. So there's no one size fits all approach to researching supply chains. But what we've done with this page here is really kind of lay out what we think are the key concepts and the key things that you want to be thinking about as you encounter a new supply chain. And if you scroll down to the bottom here, you'll see that we've got a couple of case studies that look at very particular types of commodities. And that kind of gets into the details of how we conducted those investigations. So we looked at a palm oil project in Indonesia, and then a power plant in Cote d'Ivoire. So that's kind of just an overview of how to follow the money on the site. I also wanted to just give you a little demo of two new data tools that we've launched that can help you do this research. So we have been working with the University of Chicago Data Science Institute to develop these tools. And they really do things that no publicly available tool that I know about can do. So if you go to the homepage and you scroll down, you can find these tools. It's in the Follow the Money Data Tools section of the website. And we've got 2 now that we've launched, but we're going to be adding to these in the coming months and years. And really our long-term vision here is to create a sort of open access financial terminal for activists. And we hope as we add tools, we can help increase the transparency of the global financial system. So if you go to this section of the page, here are the 2 tools. The first one that I want to talk about is our Development Bank Investment Tracker, or DEBIT for short. And this tool is really powerful. It searches every investment made by 17 development finance institutions that have independent accountability mechanisms. So I'm just going to launch that tool. Just click here, Use Now, and it will open on a new tab. And you see here, the tool is searching about 300,000 records. So it's a lot of information, and it's pulling those records directly from the websites of these 17 development finance institutions that we mentioned. And it's pulling this information every 2 weeks. So the information is quite current. So you can count on it being pretty up to date. So if I'm researching the CBG case, the thing that I want to do is I want to actually just type in the name of the project, and I want to see if there are any development finance institutions that are supporting that project. So I'll go ahead and do that now. I'm going to type in the full name of CBG, which you see there, just in this top search bar. And it takes a minute for it to do the search. But it looks like I've got a couple of hits based on that search term, right? So in this left column here, that's the actual development finance institution that's involved. So we see here that we've got the IFC, which is the private sector arm of the World Bank, looks to be financing something called CBG Expansion, which sounds very promising. That sounds like our project. And it provided some money, and it looks like 2015, late 2015. And we've got an amount here, about $140 million. The country is Guinea, so that all seems to check out. And then we also see that the Development Finance Corporation, which is the US government's development bank, has also provided support for the expansion of bauxite mining in Sangretti, which is the region in Guinea where the mine is located. And that was also done around the same time, it looks like 2016, as the IFC, and a very large sum of money, $150 million. So it looks like we've got some leads here. The one thing I would say is anything that you find on this tool, you're going to want to corroborate with the actual source documents. And it's really easy to do that. So if you just double click on the results here, it's going to take you to the IFC's page that has all this information. And you can kind of drill down and get some more detail on what the tool found. So what we see here is, again, this is the IFC page. We see our project name, so that checks out. That's the mine that we're looking at. It's got some dates and some more information on the nature of IFC's investment. So this looks to check out. It looks like IFC has actually financed this mine. You can do the same thing with the DFC results. So just double click on that, and it's going to take you directly to the DFC website for more details. So I definitely encourage you to do that if you're finding results on the tool. So that's our DEBIT tool. And then I also wanted to show you our shareholder tracker. So this tool is searching the shareholdings of the world's 80 largest investment firms. And this is based on information that they're providing to the US Securities and Exchange Commission. So let's just go ahead and launch that tool. And this is a tool that you're going to be using during the shareholding research that you're doing on the investment chain. So the tool is searching about 400,000 records from the SEC website, which is quite a lot. And it's updating these records every 3 months. And that's how often the investment firms are having to provide this information to the SEC. So again, it's very current. So if I'm doing research on CBG, the thing that I want to do is I want to go to this company column. So that's the company that the shareholders actually hold shares in. And I can just do a search here. So I mentioned that Alcoa, that US corporation, was one of the owners of the mine. I'm just going to type in Alcoa here into the company column. And we have 117 records. So that's quite a lot. So it seems that we have a lot of shareholders in Alcoa that might be of note. And if you just look down here, so again, this is the company, and we're seeing Alcoa in the results. This column here, investor, that's a key one. So that actually tells you who the shareholder is. And this column tells you how many shares they hold in Alcoa. And this tells you the value of those shares. So because we have so many records here, what I really want to do is I want to find out who are the most important shareholders of Alcoa, who are the ones that have the biggest stake which means they have the most financial leverage over Alcoa. So I can do that by sorting this values column. So if I click on it twice, it's going to sort the results in descending order, and it's going to show us the biggest shareholders first. So we see here Vanguard Group, which is a very large, very well-known US investment firm, holds over $1 billion in shares in Alcoa. So it's a pretty significant shareholder. We also see a few other well-known investment firms here that hold shares in Alcoa. We've got BlackRock, which has got a couple of different entries, again, a very large stake, close to $1 billion, State Street and Dimensional Fund Advisors. Just like with debit, I encourage you to cross-reference the results in the tool with the actual source document itself. So you can do that. You can just click on the result, and that will take you to the SEC filing that it's pulling information from. So that's our shareholder tool. Yeah, so that's sort of the end of my overview. I'm just going to end my screen sharing now, and David is going to put up the results of our investigation of CBG, and I'm just going to briefly kind of touch on what we found in our research, and then I'll hand it over to Natalie to talk more about the advocacy side of things. So you see here, this is CBG's investment chain, or the upstream. And as we mentioned, if you look in the top left of the screen, you see those 3 key parent companies. So that's Alcoa, Rio Tinto, and Dadco. And you see the stakes that they have, and then you see that they share ownership of the mine with the government of Guinea. And then if you look to the right of CBG, you see those 2 green circles. So you see IFC and DFC. So as we found in the debit tool, the IFC and the DFC have provided a significant amount of money to the mine itself. So they're directly funding the mine. So that's the upstream, kind of the key takeaways. Next slide. Now we have the downstream, or the supply chain. And this is quite a complex graphic, and the research was quite complex. But what we did was we followed the bauxite from the mine in Guinea as it was sent kind of around the world, really, to various buyers and traders and refiners, smelters. And the reason that we followed it so painstakingly is we wanted to find out where it ended up, who actually used the bauxite that was, refined into aluminum at the end of the chain. And so that was a key finding. If you go to the next slide, what we found was after it went through all of that, it ended up being used by some very well-known car brands. So these car brands were using the aluminum to actually make their cars. And it was a very important pressure point for advocacy in this case. So with that, I'll hand it over to Natalie to talk about the actual advocacy strategies.
Thanks, Dustin. Amazing work, developing those tools and getting it together into that website. And even I'm learning from your presentation, so thanks for that. So I'm going to talk about what we do once we've got that investment and supply chain information. How do we take that information and turn it into an effective and powerful advocacy strategy? So to state the obvious, holding corporations accountable for human rights and environmental abuses is not easy. And the fact is, we're operating within a global economic system in which the balance of power is firmly stacked in favor of large corporations and against poor communities who we're working with. The premise of the follow the money approach is to use the levers of that system, the levers of capitalism, against irresponsible corporate actors. And because of the power imbalance, our first principle in designing and implementing advocacy strategies is that we never rely on one avenue alone, like a single complaint mechanism or other legal action or the publication of one report. We look at the full investment and supply chain picture and design a multi-layered and sequenced strategy aimed at shifting power to communities. So I'm going to explain how we're doing this to hold CBG, the bauxite mining company in Guinea, accountable. And the website has guidance on all the steps and the tactics I'm going to talk about I won't show the website again, but please do go through it to have a look at how we elaborate and explain these tactics, and hopefully you'll find it helpful. So Dustin's already explained CBG's investment and supply chain. And we identified many pressure points in this one, both upstream among investors and financiers, and downstream with a host of major car brands sourcing from the mine. And this opened up lots of potential strategies, which we wanted to center around a formal complaint to one of the mechanisms available. We had our ideas about the most strategic approach, but the first thing we needed to do was to take the information and the options available to the affected communities and help them make an informed decision about the action they wanted to take, if at all. So this is Mariama, our Africa Program Associate, explaining the CBG investment and supply chain and the advocacy options that opened up to community leaders back in 2018. And what we found then, and what we consistently find, is that communities find it extremely empowering to understand who's behind the project and the company they're up against and the range of actors that are enabling the project that's harming them and indeed profiting from that project. And they implicitly get how some of these actors outside their country might become unlikely allies in their struggle. Now, that said, when we presented the advocacy options, there was disagreement among the community members to begin with. Some were clear that they just wanted to go for it and file a complaint, and they really saw the strength and value of that. And others worried that it was too adversarial and risky. So what did we do? We discussed the pros and cons of the approaches. We offered some security risk mitigation options, and then just gave them space to discuss and resolve their disagreements amongst themselves. Ultimately, they decided to file a complaint and hundreds of households signed on. But giving them that space to discuss and deliberate and come to a unified decision on strategy was key, because, you know, conflict and disagreement amongst communities is not unusual, but you need to work on really facilitating community solidarity and community mobilization behind these strategies. Otherwise, they're very unlikely to succeed. So next, we needed to gather the evidence of harms. And there's a lot of power in credible evidence of impacts. And it's essential to be armed with strong, substantiated evidence when companies inevitably try to deny, discredit, and deflect when confronted with the accusations of the harms that they've caused. So we worked with our local partners in Guinea, CICID and Adramgi, going from village to village, and in this case there were more than a dozen, so that was a lot of work, to conduct interviews and focus group discussions with women and youth, to take photos and video evidence, and just to witness the impacts ourselves so we could put together a compelling case. Later, we also worked with cartographers and a group of community members to conduct participatory mapping of their customary land and resource use and how mining had affected these over the years. And that was really an amazing exercise for many reasons. And I won't go into that too much now, but it was a great process. And I'd be happy to talk about it with others, people who are interested later. Then, with evidence in hand, before filing the complaint, we attempted to engage directly with CBG, with the mining company. And, you know, we do suggest trying that, although in some cases it may not be appropriate, but it shows a good faith effort to attempt to engage the company before you move on to complaint filing and other steps. So we sent a firm letter setting out the main impacts and the community demands and put the company on notice of our intention to file a formal complaint. We gave them a deadline and we did not get a response, so it was time to file the complaint. So CBG's investment chain opened several complaints options, and this will often be the case. We view complaint mechanisms, otherwise known as non-judicial grievance mechanisms, as a centerpiece or an anchor of an effective advocacy strategy. While they're rarely effective on their own, they can provide a credible process for the remediation of harms by a hopefully neutral body. And even just filing a formal complaint based on strong evidence that substantiates community claims gives legitimacy to their concerns. And we found that companies along the investment and supply chain that we've reached out to are more likely to take the case seriously when we can point to a well-written and compelling complaint. But not all complaints mechanisms are created equal. Some are definitely stronger than others. So the community had a decision to make. These are some of the complaints mechanisms that arose from CBG's investment and supply chain. We could file to the IFC's Compliance Advisor Ombudsman, or CAO, the US Development Finance Corporation Office of Accountability, OECD National Contact Points of the US, Canadian, UK, and German governments against CBG's multinational owners, and also the Aluminium Stewardship Initiative's complaint mechanism. That's a industry sustainability association. And we could have filed against an ASI certified refinery that we found was sourcing from CBG. So the communities had to consider the most strategic one to use. In this case, for a variety of reasons, they landed on the CAO, which is regarded as one of the stronger mechanisms. The other options for filing are still in the back pockets. You know, the communities have these options in their back pockets for an escalation strategy if they need it. So, you know, this choice often needs to be made by communities, you know, where to file. And on our website, you can find information on how to evaluate the relative effectiveness of the complaint mechanisms available and who you can reach out to for advice. Most complaint mechanisms offer a mediation service and some sort of compliance investigation against applicable standards. So this is another decision that community complainants need to make. Is it worth attempting mediation or dialogue with the company to try and resolve their grievances? In this case, the community thought it was. So we discuss on our website how to help guide that decision-making process by communities. And you can see here some of the pros and cons of both mediation and compliance review, but we elaborate on that on the website. Next, we look back at the investment and supply chain and ask, what else can we do to shift power in the community's favour so they have the best chance of success in the complaints process? What did we do in this case? We wrote letters to many of the pressure points, alerting them to the complaint and urging them to use their leverage to get CBG to the table. We wrote to all the shareholders, lenders, and many of the car companies that source from the mine. We explained their financial and supply chain links to the mine and pointed to their human rights responsibilities emerging from those relationships. Now, of course, as expected, some of the companies never responded, but some did. And we had very productive conversations with several car companies in particular. And quite a few of those engaged with CBG and its joint venture owners, Rio Tinto and Alcoa, expressing their expectation of respect for human rights in their supply chains and a resolution of communities' grievance through the mediation. And we've repeated this outreach to pressure points several times throughout the process to keep up the pressure. So in case you're wondering, you know, who did engage, who were the good actors, standouts in particular were Mercedes-Benz, BMW, and Audi Volkswagen, who engaged from the beginning and are continuing to monitor the process and communicate with us and the mining companies even years on. So those are the companies that really have become unlikely allies in boosting the power of the communities. We've also used media advocacy throughout the process to increase reputational risk to the companies, because ultimately it's reputational, legal, and financial risk that motivate companies to act. So public advocacy to complement the private engagement is key. We got media attention around filing the complaint, and we've emphasised the role and responsibilities of major car brands that source from CBG's mine in a major report on our website and to journalists throughout the process. And indeed, all of this has placed enormous pressure on CBG and it's produced results. What have we achieved? We got a reluctant CBG to the negotiating table. IFC, Rio Tinto and Alcoa agreed to be observers to the mediation and have stepped up their involvement in addressing the environmental and social impacts of the mine. So those actors are there really pushing CBG along. Major players in the car industry have used their leverage and are watching this case. We've now had more than 200 hours of mediation, and the community representatives have been active, mobilised and strong advocates for their villages. They've reached an agreement on safeguards around the use of dynamite blasting, which is essentially how CBG has been conducting bauxite mining, and very harmful, of course. So those safeguards are really key. And also on the payment of compensation for damages caused by blasting. And right now, CBG is repairing water sources to ensure communities have access to sufficient water. So it has been a slow process, as these mediation processes often are, and it's been frustrating at times. But the communities have definitely seen a shift in the power dynamics on the ground. Things are starting to change. So that's how we have used the follow the money approach in the CBG case. I hope that gives you a good picture of how it can be used to great effect. And I encourage you to check out the website to find out more information about all these steps and strategies, from mobilising the community and collecting evidence to using complaints mechanisms and doing shareholder advocacy, and really everything else you need to know on how to turn a project's investment and supply chain into action and a pathway to justice. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you and answering your questions, and take it over to you, David.